Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Alright, so today, Mr. Wagstaff is going to take us into the lion's den. We're going to spend the day talking about the Confederate flag. So the Confederate flag is controversial in modern America. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the history of the Confederate flag and we're going to talk about it so that you can better understand the Confederate flag. Now, this might be, if you care one way or other, you might be like, all right, well, Mr. Wagstaff is going to tell us at the end here, is a Confederate flag racist? So, in history, all right, things aren't binary, meaning there's not always yes or no answers. It is largely up to interpretation. Flags, in particular, are symbols. They represent things. Where it gets real touchy, especially with the Confederate flag, which is probably the most, that outside of the, I would say the Nazi flag, but everybody pretty much agrees on what the Nazi flag means today, all right? Nobody's flying the Nazi flag and being like, it means something else to me. Flags are symbolic. They're literally symbols. I mean, that's the whole point of them. And they mean different things to different people. So, there is not a 100% guarantee one way or other on that question because the flags mean different things to different people. With that being said, I am going to venture right into the lion's den today and give you some historical facts, all right? And then looking at how the flag, I will talk a little bit today at the end of the class about how the Confederate flag has been used after the Civil War and where the controversy present day comes from. All right. So, but let's start out by talking about the actual flag and where we are here as we talk about the Civil War. So there was, let me make myself smaller here. So after the first Battle of Bull Run, all right, it became pretty clear that the South needed its own flag. Here's why. When they went into battle at the first Battle of Bull Run, you know what flag the Confederacy used? The American flag. That was their flag. Real confusing. Flags are really important in warfare to know who's on whose side. Is that a good guy over there? Is that a bad guy over there? Who knows? All right. When you're using the same flag, it causes massive amounts of confusion. Now, the Confederacy struggled for materials mightily during the Civil War. So while if the roles were reversed and the United States of America had to create a new flag, it would have been done pretty quickly. The South doesn't have a lot of manufacturing, and you have to manufacture flags. So things took a little longer, and they didn't run super smoothly in the South, which isn't a huge surprise. But the South attempting to make a Confederate flag ran into a whole bunch of struggles. Now, so there are multiple changes to the Confederate flag throughout the Civil War. This one right here is probably not the most well known, even though it has the most famous name. This is Stars and Bars. All right. A lot of times people hear the term Stars and Bars if you're referring to the Confederate flag, and you think of the traditional one that you see all the time. You can see it in your mind when I say it, if you're familiar with Confederate flags, with the cross and all that. But this is actually what was officially called the Stars and Bars. This is the flag of the Confederacy. Now, here's what's different about these flags here and the American flag. The American flag is used all the time. If it's flown over the capitals, it's used in battle and all that. Not all countries do that, and the Confederacy is going to not do that as well. The Confederacy wants a flag that represents the state, so each state's going to have their individual flag, but they also wanted a flag that represents kind of like the Confederacy, like a group of all the states. But since each state had their own military, because they had like the Articles of Confederation, each army is going to have their own flag, all right? So, there are multiple flags. There's the flags that get used in battle, and there are flags that get used for politics. This is a flag that was used for politics, all right? The problem was, while they tried to use this for both of them, all right, this specific flag, even though it was used for politics, when they would take it into battle, one of the reasons they refused to take it into battle, what does that look a whole lot like? It looks a whole lot like the American flag, causes the exact confusion that the other one was. So the original Stars and Bars in 1861, they're going to scrap this one. They're like, yeah, it's too confusing. So we're going to go with this flag. Now, you're like, hey, I recognize that. Hold on now. You do. I know you do. But so there was most of the battles are going to take place in Virginia. By 1863, we're 2 solid years into the battle, into the wars. Tons of battles are taking place. Almost all the battles are taking place in Virginia, the big major ones, because that's between Washington, D.C. and Virginia. So it stands to reason that Virginia is going to have the most powerful military. And early in the war, the South keeps winning. Spoiler alert. Robert E. Lee is going to be in command of the Virginia Army. The Virginia Army is very powerful. The Virginia military, the Virginia Army, this was their battle flag. And we're going to talk about it more in a second. So this flag, just the square version, all right, just this part right here, all right, that was the symbol that was used for the Virginia military's battle flag, all right. It had become a symbol of, hey, we're winning. We're actually winning. So when they wanted to make a new national flag, it's not surprising that they decided to use that symbol so that you could see it from a distance on a white background to separate it from the battle flag. However, when you take a big old white flag and you're in war, what do people think you might be doing if you're waving it around? Surrendering. So this flag doesn't last real long. In 1865, all right, so we have to scrap it again. We're going to scrap this one. They're going to make this one. This is the third official flag. They're going to put this white stripe here on the side. Sorry, that's not a white stripe. It's a red stripe here on the side so that it doesn't look like you're surrendering, right? Like, they're really not trying real hard here. All right. So this one actually gets approved like 2 weeks before the war ends and the South surrenders. Spoiler alert as well. So this one was never really put into circulation, all right, for the flag of the Confederacy, even though it was the third official national flag. All right. So to recap, the national flag that represents the Confederacy are these three. This one, which is called Stars and Bars. All right. This one, which is the second national flag. All right. And then the third one. Keep in mind, the Confederate flag that you see today doesn't look like any of those. All right. So the Confederate flag that you see a lot of times, or you think you see all the time, is this one. This is the battle flag of the Confederacy. Very specifically, this is what is used by the Virginia military. This is the battle flag. Now, flags, when you make them, have to have symbolism. And there's a lot of symbolism in it. And because this is the most highly ridiculously researched thing forever, there is some controversy over the symbolism inside this flag. So I'll give you both sides of it. The 13 stars represent the 13 states that seceded. All right. So the stars do represent the states. Now, the cross here is St. Andrew's cross, and it's a cross turned sideways. This is what is frustrating, because I was under the impression with all the history that I have, and it was a thing. This was St. Andrew's cross turned sideways. There is some arguments now that it's not based on a cross, and there's no Christian meanings to it, which I've just seen that here recently doing research for this presentation, and it really throws a kink in my thought process. But then I question if that's a valid piece of new history, because the Confederacy absolutely would use symbolism, and they're not going to put a cross and not have it symbolize something, because Protestant Christianity in the South. So if I'm proven wrong, I will 100% admit it. Not that it really changes the story here, because it's still official. St. Andrew's cross. It is a cross turned sideways. It is a cross turned sideways. Listen to me when I say that. It's a cross turned sideways. This is the official flag. Now, this is the battle flag. This is the flag that would be taken into battle during the Confederacy. All right. So this is the flag that would be taken into battle. It is a cross turned sideways. Are you with me so far? All right. So this flag didn't exist in the Civil War. That is what kind of blows people's minds, and we talk about symbolism, and they mean different things to different people. So, and let me put a whole bunch of asterisks next to what I'm getting. Let me teach it to you, and then go back through and tell you how everything I'm getting ready to tell you is questionable, because I don't want to leave a stone unturned here. But this flag doesn't mean the same thing as that flag. It doesn't, and here's why. It is a cross, all right? It has to be square for it to be a cross. When you make it rectangle, it distorts the cross of St. Andrew's cross, all right? Completely changing the meaning to it. For something that is a symbol, changing the meaning to a symbol fundamentally is not good, all right? Now, here's where it gets a little complicated historically, but again, I don't want to be teaching you something and then you start Googling and, but Mr. Wagstaff lied to us. I'm not lying to you. Let me give you more info to this. So, while I posted this flag never existed in the Civil War, that's a lie. This flag absolutely existed in the Civil War. Number one, it's very close to the battle jack flag, which is what they would put on ships. The South had no ships. They had like one with the Merrimack, and we'll talk about it. But so it is very close to the battle jack flag, and the battle jack flag has a different color blue in it. So they were making all the flags, which have to be square. Again, has to be square. But the national flags are rectangle. Battle flags are square. National flags rectangle, battle flags square. The place that makes the square flags in Tennessee gets destroyed during the Civil War. So they need a new place to make the flags. The only place left to make the flags is in Atlanta, which makes these flags, the rectangle ones. Because they're so short on supplies, they can't just I don't know why they can't just make it square. I don't know why. But that wasn't even a thing. They just had to get flags out. So they started making battle flags. At the very end of the Civil War, there were some battle flags that looked almost just like this. Now, they shouldn't have, because that breaks the rules when you make a flag. Like, you wouldn't make a flag today of 47 stars and be like, you just didn't have enough material. Just 47 stars is fine. That's basically what the South was doing at the end of the Civil War when they ended up with just a handful of these rectangle flags. All right. So there are situations where they were carrying rectangle flags into battle. All right. Now, so I want to preempt this because I know this is a touchy subject and I do not want to mislead anybody. Here's what, so the Civil War is going to end. The South is going to lose. All right. And the South acknowledges that it lost. Civil War is over. Slavery is going to end. We'll talk about it in detail in class, in ad nauseum. But let's talk about where the Confederate flag goes from here. Where does history go from here at the Confederate flag? All right. Because there were hundreds of thousands of men who fought and died for the Confederacy. This flag, right, this would represent what they fought and died for, what their belief system was. Regardless of what their belief system was, and you're like, slavery, you can absolutely make that argument. But keep in mind, the slave owners aren't the ones fighting. Slave owners are the rich people. Slave owners didn't fight in the Civil War. They paid other people to go fight for them. Almost nobody that died in combat in the Civil War was a slave owner because they would have been rich enough to just buy their way out of the draft. All right. So the people who died were almost exclusively non-slave owners. Does that mean that they're not racist? And does that mean that they wouldn't own slaves if they could? No, it doesn't mean any of that. It's just that slave owners really weren't the ones dying in the Civil War. It was all the poor people fighting for the rich people. All right. So, the Confederate flag, after the Civil War is over, and like the whole country is destroyed. I mean, the whole thing's on fire. People are trying to hug it out and move on from it. The Confederate flag, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, don't really become a thing. They basically like maybe the equivalent like a late 1800s history book would talk about it. Nobody flew it around with pride because it was symbolic of an entire generation of young men who died. It was sad. The only time you would ever see one of these flags, this one, because after the Civil War, you're not going to see this flag because once they have the ability to make the flag correctly, they would use this flag, or they're going to use the actual stars and bars. All right. So the only time these flags would show up is usually at like memorials. All right. So when this flag came out, it was a sad and somber time. All right. It was like, okay, it was, look at all these people who died. I can't believe that we went that far with our own country. And all this other stuff. It wasn't really used as a symbol of anything. Really, because after the Civil War, there ends up being this, let's hug it out, this America, and we're all going to be America again, and we're going to move forward together. All right. So, this flag doesn't really show up anywhere. For 90 years, this flag doesn't show up. 90 years after the Civil War ends, in the 1950s, this flag shows up. This flag is what shows up in the 1940s and the 1950s as a symbol by white supremacists against the integration of schools. All right. This is in the 1950s. The flags they have are always rectangle. All right. I cannot find it because I guess racist people aren't keeping good history. I can't find if that's on purpose. You're going to find very few square flags, very few, in the 1950s. And all the Confederate flags that come out, because all of a sudden there's just this boom, everybody has Confederate flags. And what it is used by, white people who are viciously opposed to black people being allowed to go to school with white people, with the Brown versus Board of Education ruling in 1954. So, this flag comes out as a symbol of white supremacy, meaning that white people should be the superior race and treated better in the United States. Like this is a Confederate flag. Civil rights are unconstitutional. Like the idea that everybody should be treated equal in America is unconstitutional. Is like an actual arguments that people would make. And the Confederate flag is an example of a time period. So all of a sudden, at this point, it is absolutely being used in a racist connotation in the 1950s. And again, the flag they're using is not this flag. It's this flag, the rectangle one. So you see it here. You see it here. Just I just Googled pictures of segregation or desegregation and the Confederate flag, and almost every single one of them is going to be every one of them is going to be a rectangle flag. This is the governor of Mississippi. All right. And when we get later in American history, I'll tell you this story and I'll bring this picture back up again. In the early 1960s, a man named James Meredith gets accepted into Ole Miss University. He was a fighter pilot in World War II. He's a 4.0 student. He is fantastic. He gets accepted into Ole Miss University. Only when he shows up at school, they find out that he's black. All right. Even though he's a highly decorated fighter pilot and Tuskegee Airmen in World War II, they find out he is black and shows up to Ole Miss, which is an all-white university. If you were black, you couldn't show up to it. This guy, who's the governor of Mississippi, was so angry about that, he told the students that go to Ole Miss to burn the college to the ground before you let one of those N-words in, like his words, all right? This is in the 1960s. Adamantly against integration. This is a flag that he flew as a symbol that he is against integration. It got used in the 1950s and 60s as a racist symbol. In the 1950s and 60s, if you had this flag, it is only because it was a racist connotation, all right? As the Civil Rights Act progresses, 1964 Voting Rights Act in 1965, the Civil Rights Act in 1968, which is lesser known. As we move forward, the use of this as a purely racist symbol starts to like fade in people's minds, and then they're like, hey, that represents the South, like. And then people start using the Confederate flag, and what's crazy is people use this flag and this flag interchangeably. Some people will use square flags, some people will use rectangle flags, and they're like, woo, Bojangles and sweet tea, I love the South. Now, I grew up in a very country area, all right, as y'all know. I grew up with a bunch of people who had Confederate flags, and I, as a white male, never knew of them being racist. Didn't think that they were racist at all. But as I've got older, I've realized that as a white person, I don't see the racist tendencies. If as a white person, other white people tend to hide their racism from other white people. It's not like all the white people get together and the racist and non-racist people just start like having racist conversations. It's a relatively hidden thing a lot of times. So I grew up with the Confederate flag and didn't think anything of it because obviously I'm not the focus of the hostilities that flag has represented throughout history. So as it gets garbled, as it gets to present day, some people have a Confederate flag. All right. And I'll be as optimistic here as possible. There are white males or females that use the Confederate flag and they just love Bojangles and sweet tea and going fishing and hunting, and it's just a sign of Southern pride. All right. There are people, I'm sure, who view it that way. There's a lot of people who view it as an extremely racist symbol that symbolizes white supremacy. Is somebody wrong there? It's a symbol. It means different things to different people. All right. However, if you're a person who's like, yeah, it's not racist to me, I'm going to keep flying it, you have to understand that when somebody claims that you are flying a racist flag and are very upset about it, they're not wrong. They're not. Because there absolutely is historical evidence to back up there is racism. I mean, if you just take even the square battle flag, it still represents the Confederacy that was fighting for its independence, its own country, because it wanted to keep slavery, all right? Which it has racist implications in itself. A couple other things. If we're going to go down this rabbit hole, I want to talk about it. Let's talk about the statues. Let's talk about the statues. Here in 2020, when this is being recorded, the Confederate statues are very controversial in the United States. And so the argument is you can't take down my heritage. Like it is history. You can't destroy history. I'm a history teacher and I teach U.S. history. And I'm going to be the first one to stand up that you got to defend history. But let's talk about these Confederate statues. So a lot of the Confederate statues weren't made for historical purposes. A lot of the Confederate statues were made for racist purposes, not historical. There is a difference. Not all statues are the same, all right? There absolutely are statues that were made for historic, that is remembrance, and it is done to remember the massive amounts of people who died in the South. The vast majority are not made for that, and it all comes down to when were they built. Here's a timeline, all right? So I tried to simplify some of this. Basically, the more dots is the more statues, the more monuments, all right? So the Civil War is going to end right here. Any statue that really gets built here after the Civil War, I 100% would agree with you that this is historically related. Remembrance, understanding, memorials, absolutely. You get to 1896. There's a court case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which says it's completely legal to segregate the United States. There ends up being backlash by the African American community. This is one of the first times black people were like, what? Not cool. When black people get upset about Plessy versus Ferguson, there is a vicious backlash by white America. All right. And after 1896, now keep in mind, this is 30 years after the Civil War. You see a skyrocket and so each one of these, this is not how many exist, this is how many new get built that year. When the NAACP gets founded, shortly after that, that is the most, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the most statues possible get made. Now, what you need to understand is these statues, after Plessy versus Ferguson, says it's okay to segregate. These statues are getting placed in front of courthouses to represent the Confederacy, to honor the Confederacy. Courthouses where black people and white people both show up at, because everything else is segregated. So this is literally a sign. And I'm not making it. You can look at the speeches when these were unveiled by the white supremacists and the KKK. That is who are at these meetings when they are unveiled. The one in Lexington, North Carolina. That is who spoke. As of when this is being recorded in 2020, there's a controversy over it. The keynote speaker in the early 1900s at the Confederate statue, which is to honor the fallen soldiers, was a white supremacist who literally said this is a symbol to black society that, justice isn't blind. That's why they're putting it at the courthouse. The statues that get built here are massively racist. Massively racist. And then they're like, we're done kind of building statues. And then when does it come back out? Right here in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. Let's let black people go to school with white people. Skyrockets. All right, you know what those green dots mean? Let's move this over. Green dots are where they're built on school property. Why are you building a Confederate statue on school property right after black people get to be allowed to go to school? All right. The Brown versus Plessy versus Ferguson, those are blue. That gets taken at the courthouses. They're not building them at courthouses anymore. Now, why would that be? Unless you're trying to send a symbol to black America that they ain't in charge and that things are going to be like it used to be. The statues, while the statues themselves don't say racist stuff, they don't, all right? They were built by people who expected to send a racist message. Now, let me be very clear here. It's history, so there is not one extreme or the other. However, upper 90% of all the Confederate statues that were built in these two time periods are going to have been built for racial reasons. All right. Statues don't represent your history. You can't tear down a statue and tear down history. That's not a thing that happens. And people are very upset about statues. And I don't believe, let me also clarify, people who support these statues today and don't want them torn down, they're not racist people necessarily, all right? I believe there's probably a lot of people who don't understand why it was built. And that's what my job is here, to understand why there's hostilities against these Confederate statues. That there is a lot of, if it was built, any statue that was built back at this point is in memory. All right. It is not to, send a message. These here almost exclusively are designed to send a message of white supremacy. And that is why the Confederate statues are controversial. Now, I want to show you this right here. How quickly opinions change. Because when you're talking about symbols, whether it's Confederate statues, whether you're talking about Confederate flags, symbolism changes because what it means to different people changes. I want to show you, so I'm recording this in 2020. This is in 2015. 2015. This is a poll. Is the Confederate flag a symbol of racism? 33%. Southern pride is 57%. The majority of people in 2015 felt that across all boards, thought that the Confederate flag is Southern pride. The majority. Obviously, there's 33% things absolutely racist. That's in 2015. This is in December of 2019. Most recent poll I can get. All right. The question is, what does the Confederate flag represent? All right. White non-educated or non-college educated is the only group that doesn't think that it is racist. White college educated believe it's racist. Black college educated think it's racist. Black not college educated think it's racist. Hispanic college educated thinks it's racist. Hispanic non-college educated think it's racist. Asian college educated think it's racist. Asian not college educated think it's racist. That's in 5 years. Have the monuments changed? Has the flag changed in 5 years? No. But they're symbols. And what it means to people does change. So the meanings of symbols can change over time, all right, over what they represent. So, is the Confederate flag racist? There's not a yes or no answer to it. But to understand the history of the Confederate flag is to understand why it is a controversial subject. Hopefully, you got something out of that. If I have gotten something wrong on this, please let me know. I've tried my best because I know you're walking into the danger zone here. I want to give out as much education as possible. So hopefully, now the people who are adamantly against the Confederate flag understand why some people may not view it as racist, whereas people who think there's no way this could be racist understand why people are adamantly opposed to it, because there is a very complex history to symbols, and the interpretation of symbols change over time. All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow.